So let's kick this off. We're going to start this conversation by just talking about this from the context of, I'll ask one question and I'd love to kind of just go straight to the audience because we've got a lot of probably questions out there. First thing I want to have everybody talk about is, how did you handle this at the executive level? I think that's really something that's on the mind of a lot of us. How do we handle this at the executive level? How do we handle this at the business level when they come asking? Or if they didn't come asking, how did you bring it to them and get them moving down the road in a way that's constructive and organized? So I'll hand that maybe to yourself first. I know you have an awesome leader who's maybe still here, but I'm sure that'll be a good starting point for yourself.
Thank you, Nate. Tim, are you here? All right. Good that he's not here. All right. I'm Sabry. I'm Director of Digital Solution from Regal Rexnord. So we are currently actively working on multiple spaces within the AI implementation. So going to your question of how do you handle at the decision-making level? How do you handle at the executive level? So it is partly top-down, partly bottom-up. So the bottom-up is for the team, for the executives, or for the companies to show what is the value of it, how we can bring it in. So when you see the bottom energy that's simmering in your organization, then you already automatically have a need to start making decisions in the top. So from why it is also top-down is you need to have it as a structured execution. Otherwise, it can easily fall out into in the wrong place of AI implementation, especially when it comes to security and deployment of like brand equity, creating the right content, generating the right content. You need a structured approach. So what drives us today currently is, where do we want it? Is it generation based or is it prediction based? If it is prediction based, do we have the data to do it? If we don't have the data, how do we bring in the data? Do we have the skills to do it? If we don't have the skills, do we upskill them or partner with the good partners? Do we have the technology landscape? Should we go for the cloud providers like Azure, Google, or Amazon? Or should we do an in-house or private cloud like OCP or Pivotal? What is the technology landscape? And finally, the culture. How do we bring in the right culture so that it drives the momentum in the right direction? So all these are important points for the decision making from the executive. And it also goes back to your point of the commoditized AI versus mission AI. So what is the point solution that we can quickly deploy and enjoy the wins and keep the momentum, which require, and what are the areas which require systemic changes, which is going to be transformational journey for a long years. So knowing all the answers for these and having the conversation at the top level is important to make the right decision. At the same time, the time is the essence. So you need to have a conversation as quickly as possible.
I'll be very brief. When it comes to higher ed and what we think about as the academic enterprise, we typically engage with presidents and chancellors who completely understand that this is an existential issue for them. They may be focused on student outcomes first, they may be focused on transformation management with faculty and so forth. I would say there's a broad spectrum of starting points. At the enterprise level, in industry, leadership teams understand the need to bring it in. Otherwise, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to engage at that point, and it really comes down to managing transformation, the skill sets that are involved beyond prompt design or prompt engineering, and really working with them to understand how to tie it to existing strategic objectives, whether they're in the midst of a different transformation or it's status quo business. How do we tie to the business objectives to find ways to amplify success related to those objectives?
Do I get to go?
You get to go.
All right. So organizationally, Jim Savage said go for it. There really wasn't any convincing. But when I started here at Concurrency like 6 years ago, we were doing machine learning, we were doing LLMs before it was cool. And but at that time, it was these were multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects. They didn't go under the radar. I mean, this is something you went and got approved. So there really wasn't a lot of discussion around it or trying to get organizational alignment because there was a strategic reason why you're doing it. Now it's more commoditized, and we can do pilots in, a couple of weeks, couple of months, with budgets of $15, $20, $50,000. Those are usually in signing budgets for somebody that, in management role. And so the last thing that we want to have happen is to have a project, get shut down because an executive finds out you're doing what? So I think it's really, really important to get, our process at concurrencies to get an executive alignment before we even start talking about next steps. So it's my perspective.
All right, so I'm Steve Baumgartner. I'm the CIO at Inpro, and we've been lucky for me, our CEO and our whole senior management group has been very technology focused for many years. In fact, we do our strategic planning each year. Typically about 20 to 25 of the 30 projects we focus on have a technology component to it. So they're very used to spending money and moving into the technology space. We started our first ML model about 4 years ago and have been fine-tuning it. And then now, of course, our CEO does love to go to technology talks like this one. Came back after he saw the first ChatGPT one and like, hey, we're just starting to talk about this also. So we actually brought in 2 companies to help us facilitate a full day senior management discussion, like education on it, but then also a brainstorming session in the afternoon. We came up with about 100 use cases of how they wanted to use it. We had to prioritize it down to 3, and we're just kind of going on that path right now.
So it's a pretty simple answer. The same way I convinced my 11-year-old to do something, have somebody else tell them. In this case, we had Nate come in and do a presentation to our executive team, propose the workshop, did a half-a-day virtual workshop across the company, just idea generation, talking about how AI can help them. Got out of that, it was like, oh my gosh, we have all these great ideas, we need to do all of them right now. And that's what started the ball rolling, and it has not stopped since.
So I'm going to tie onto that from a 12-year-old perspective. Since I have a 12-year-old, the other way to get them to do something is, I hate to say fear, but it's just caution, right? It's going into organizations and cautioning them on the dangers of jumping feet first, head first, as you like to call it, into any kind of technology decision. And I think the yin to the yang of Brian and Brandon here of being able to have some of those large funded data and development projects on the modern work side, it hasn't been so easy. It's the advent of the commodity and really the buzz around it that has generated some of that interest. And some of the conversations, and if you were in one of the 2 breakout sessions I had today, it was caution, really. It's thinking about, before you jump in to any of these AI type of projects, what are the guardrails around it? And I think that conversation really does go even above IT, and it goes to leadership. If you are able to get that conversation with them, while a lot of executives love to hear about AI and to really get into using some of it, I think they also have that other hat of that caution. And how do we stay out of the news? How do we implement something successfully? How do we not waste funds around some of this technology? So that's my input from a modern work perspective, and I'd love to hear what Brandon has to say.
I was not here for the question, but
Stop talking.
so far as I understand it, it was what is required to get started with AI.
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, I feel good.
At executive level. At the executive level.
Data you need for starters, and I don't mean that cutely. Like, you do need to have treated or start treating your data like a first-class citizen, right? Garbage in, garbage out. That's not new information. You can also facilitate the ease with which you make the decision to move to AI by not thinking of it as a distinctly different thing from BI or data work. Now, you can make a strong argument that it is very different, but if you're not talking about generative AI, and you have a BI team whose responsibility it is to surface the right information at the right time to the right people, that's what machine learning does. That's what it's very good at. It's just doing that in different ways, right? Using different techniques. I think that's where my perspective is. Yeah. To simplify it, right, and to get started, right? We don't. I think sometimes there's fear as a result of walling it off as this animal that's different, right? And that's true in some cases, but it's also false in most of them. Get started, fail fast, be comfortable with failing. That's a good part of the whole process. We can be concerned about security and all that, and rightfully so. But you never have to turn the system on, right? You can do that all offline. That's okay, and it's a critical and should be the primary step of any of these projects. So I guess my recommendation to some would be, treat your data like a first-class citizen. Don't consider it too distinct from BI, and don't be afraid to start.
I have a quick success story to share. So, since the question is from the executive level, since the question is from the executive level, so I want to share the success story from Jan 4th. So our CIDO, when he come in, he partnered with the CEO and the SVPs and said, "Hey, I have a cool idea. Let's do a hackathon." He said, like, but CEO is much more cautious. Are you sure it's going to work? We haven't never done it here. I'll make it work. So he went to the business partners. What are your problems? I have X, Y, Z. He brought it to the team and said, hey, these X, Y, Z, let's create a hackathon to solve it using AI. He pushed in through during the December, had everyone come to the Chicago on January 4th. We organized everything during the holidays. Like, I don't know how it happened, but we organized it. So the cool part is there was a momentum created. Business partners are now involved. C-suite is involved. The team is involved. They're all in there. This is the first time they're experiencing it. They all produced output on the day of hackathon. And now, right now, we are pursuing all the 5 outputs to the production. And one of the output is getting showcased in the sales conference next week. So that is the amount of momentum it generated. So once people start seeing the output, once people start seeing the touch and feel, once people are involved in the decision making or problem solving, you start to generate that momentum. And this quick wins will immediately tip the point of the scale in the right direction. So leave out of our success story, which you can deploy.
Awesome. Okay, so let's take a couple questions from the audience. So go ahead, raise your hand, and we will hit them. Yes?
What's the general cost of these implementations? Like deploying a solution?
What's the cost?
Yeah.
What is the cost of deploying a solution? That's probably a good question for Randy, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Passing the mic.
I can shout, but that's the button. It depends. Typically, you can, you were in the supply chain optimization talk where I shared a bit about how we phase all of our AI projects in 3 distinct phases on purpose, and we do that to de-risk the investment, whatever that number is, right? So the first stage, it's POC, it's all about proving that economic value can be created from this thing that we're about to build. The next phase is about turning it on, right? Building the infrastructure to support that, flipping the switch. And then the last phase is about automation, right? Making it a reliable means of producing economic value. The cost depends on how deep into each of those phases we go, but as a ballpark estimate, you can get started as little as, depending on the state of your data, as little as a handful of thousands of dollars up to a couple $100,000, right? But it's devil's in the details, right? So the more you invest, the better the model often works up to some ceiling. And that typically holds true for most models, whether we're talking about an LLM, where, as Steve can probably attest, and Sam, where the more you try to control the hallucinations, the better it is, right? That requires engineering time, often complex engineering time, but it's also true for time series forecasting models or constrained optimization or deep learning models or reinforcement learning, the more you invest, typically the better it performs. But I hope that gives you a sense of the cost.
Okay, next question.
How, in a general sense, concerned should any company looking at AI be about governmental regulation or the lawsuits that are around how something like OpenAI got its data set through public-facing websites and how people are trying to clamp down on that, trying to get OpenAI to pay for that type of access? I mean, how does that interact with what a business might want to do when the implementation is based on the foundations of something like that?
I can start this one. Yeah.
Go for it.
So one thing that we have worked with organizations, and not to fearmonger, but to fearmonger, thinking about that your data could potentially be given up to large language models by your users on your company technology is a very real concern. And if you're using Microsoft 365 today, which I'm gonna guess probably over 90% of you are in your organizations, that's easy to supplant by introducing first Microsoft Copilot, not Microsoft 365 Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, which essentially uses those same engines. So you're encouraging different behaviors from your users, and you can do that at no cost because that access is free to your organizations, and it leverages commercial data protection. So that way you know that if your end users are trying to generate some sort of result or some sort of output based on information that's sensitive to your organization, you know that data is not going to leave your company. You cannot say the same about ChatGPT. And so usually walling your customers off from those public AI instances is a place to start and redirect their mindset to the Microsoft, knowing that that next step on the journey into Microsoft 365 Copilot will give them things like save search and search history, and give you as IT administrators the ability to even audit that through things like communication compliance. I can know what prompts my users are sending to Microsoft 365 Copilot. Can't do that with ChatGPT, but that's really where to start, is really that concept of changing your user's behavior to use something that you know is secure, and being able to do that in a controlled manner is probably where I would say to start.
Yeah, I can echo that. So that's exactly what we did, was create an environment that is simple enough for users that they don't feel the need to go out to OpenAI and have it wall off. So I think that's the first part of your question, which is a little bit of the internal side. For us, we are slow to take the step of presenting it externally for any of our customers to make a decision off of it because of some of those risks and things like that. I can tell you, based on history, I'm watching Europe more than I'm watching the US, because most likely Europe will set the standard, California will follow it, New York will follow them, there won't be a federal mandate, but those best practices and those requirements will start coming out there. What I don't know is if we're going to be in a position that we want to take it externally before there's some clarity there, or if it's going to be after that clarity there. It's a bridge we'll cross when we get there right now.
We're in the complete same boat. Doing it internally, we need to test it better on the external side too. We just don't want to give out any wrong information. Right? I mean, it's very valuable to allow the customers to get information off hours and so on, which is the whole drive for it, but we're not there yet. We're comfortable with it, and we don't know where everything's going. Luckily, we don't have a big footprint in Europe.
Adjacent answer to that question, I completely support what you guys were saying. I think the implementation of a private OpenAI instance, Copilot, combine those two things together, they're all really answering the question of how do I make sure my own users are not spreading information into the World Wide Web and it becoming public domain knowledge like my code would be. Same kind of ideas as with like even code Copilot, like GitHub Copilot, where enterprise edition of that version is building models on your code repositories. So that's all private stuff, right? So I think the kind of core message here is do everything through a licensed private platform, Now, to your bigger question, which is how concerned are we about like OpenAI trained this stuff on a whole bunch of things. We don't really know what it trained it on. Like, are they going to get in a bunch of trouble, and thereby we're going to get in a bunch of trouble associated with using that? There's a really interesting and valuable licensing legal promise that Microsoft has made to its customers around OpenAI that shields you from the legal sort of negativity that could be associated with that. So that's something that we could certainly provide you with. Certainly your Microsoft app rep could do the same. But I think what's going to happen is we're going to see more explainability in large language models in the future as to where the content came from. That's just like probably the core question of like a lot of the existing large language models is like we can't really know where it came from. They're not telling us. I think future versions are going to have a lot more of that transparency associated with that, simply because it's going to be demanded of them of the EU and other places.
I echo everyone's point, but I'm going to take it one step above and make it much more general. So I call it RATS, or Responsible AI Task Force, is an important element of department that you need to create. It can be a committee of people existing, or it's a new team, whichever it is. The reason is they need to, day in and day out, it's not just about your data leaking out in an open AI source. So the reason why we all talk about private GPT is the GPTs use the data, the questions, and the information coming back as a feedback loop, which basically leaks out your data outside. So that's one part of it. But even within the private cloud GPT everyone is implementing, you still have the concern of your brand equity. Is the information coming out of the Copilot, that is, if we are directly implementing the text or the image into your email to your clients, marketing materials or campaign materials, it needs to echo your brand. It needs to echo your style. So there needs to be overseeing on that. There needs to be overseeing on your data governance for your ML models, removing your biases, cleaning up the data to make sure everything is there. So there needs to be, again, AI task force looking over the data governance. There needs to be a security and legal partnership from the get-go to make sure your implementation of Copilot, going back to all the Microsoft-related legal terms, is it correct? Again, that task force should be having that partnership with them. Getting the right experts into the system and overall implementing the AI project. So I echo it, but you also need to take it one level, have an AI task force which overlooks every aspect, not just your GPT aspect of it.
This is purely anecdotal, but Bill Gates has a podcast called Unconfuse Me, and Sam Altman was recently on that podcast. And they talked about explainability and transparency really coming along, but in the next couple of years. So there's a pretty sizable gap there. I would pay a lot of attention to first question you asked around indemnification for whatever tools you're employing in the enterprise.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and we have happy hour.
I'll just ask, so I'm on I attend the NORX conference, and they just did an AI symposium as well, so I did that a couple weeks ago. So there's a lot of public companies that participate in that. I'm wondering, does this panel, do you guys recommend, when you don't have an AI platform yet, is the advocation to deny all and approve the exception? Because that's kind of what I took away from that. I'm curious what the thoughts are on that.
When you say deny all and approve this exception, you just like shut off all access to all external tools?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the public side, where you can't put the company data out on the public stuff.
Okay, so my short answer to that is life finds a way.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So if you're going to do that, you got to provide safe and healthy alternatives to the, like, that's somewhat obvious, but I think some people will stop there. They'll be like, it's a year after ChatGPT came out, right?
Yeah,
some people will stop there, and if you block it on your computers, well, they'll use their cell phone or they'll use something else, right? Because there's benefit associated with it. So I think that's really the core message. You have to make this Don't put the head in, I'm not saying you're doing this. But some companies don't put the head in the sand. Put it in a position where you're arming your employees with strength to be able to do more. So that's kind of why you guys are building and delivering what you're doing, right?
So, I mean, I think exactly, when we, companies, different sizes, different needs and things like that, but I can tell you, I mean, our base product, which was just ChatGPT's capabilities, public knowledge, the commodity stuff Nate talked about, it was $50,000. I mean, for the less than half of an engineer, we had a walled off environment that we made it easier for folks to get to than going out to log into OpenAI. That, for me, was so easy to position because of the risk side and the work piece.
I want to give an example to Nat's point, the life points away. No new points, but an example. One of our employee, I mean, when you restrict the access, when you do not have an alternative, takes the Microsoft Stream provides you the caption for your meeting. Takes the caption, put it in ChatGPT, gets the summaries. Now that meeting information is out in public. Meaning the ChatGPT got trained on it. So life runs away. I want to make sure that do not put the bits in the sun. So etc.
Okay, so now